Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sue Ripers, and our presenter today is Dr. Chris Wynder. Thank you all for joining us. And the presentation that Chris is going to cover today is going to speak about our research process on how one would apply for the logistics around applying for, and how the ranking and awarding is done in our research award program. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Chris. It will take just a few moments for that to, for the access to pass over to him. So thank you very much. And Chris, I will pass it to you.
Great, so hopefully you can all see my screen. I'm just gonna go to presentation mode. As Sue mentioned, my name is Chris Wynder. I am, my role with the Brain Tumour Foundation is that I've been on the research board since about 2014. Previous to that, I was a researcher. So part of the reason that we had decided that I would do this is because I've been in your shoes, both as a student, as a postdoc, and also as a young principal investigator trying to get funding. I've also had experience at both CHR, NIH, and a bunch of other places where I've reviewed grants for several different disciplines, not just brain tumors. So I've seen a bit of what works and doesn't work from both a grant reviewer perspective and a grantee perspective. So one of my goals here today is to try and give you a sense of what works with brain tumor, but not only that, but to give you a sense of the bigger picture, sense of, you know, when you're sending grants in, you're trying to do that last check to make sure that it works. How do you make sure that it actually worked? And as I mentioned, prior to sort of joining Brain Tumour Foundation, I was a principal investigator at the McMaster Stem Cell Cancer Institute, focusing on stem cells and epigenetics and the role that they play in neural cancers. I did my postdoctoral training in more of a drug discovery lab, and my Ph.D. was in the factors that control growth during neurodevelopment. So please feel free to post questions in this side. If they're timely, I'm sure Sue will step in and stop me, or we can have some questions towards the end. As you can see here on the left-hand side, I am on Twitter, as is the Brain Tumour Foundation. I'll have that list for you at the bottom. So let's get into it. So to start, what does Brain Tumour Foundation fund? There's really three major programs. As you can see on the top level, we have three different kinds: studentships, fellowships, and research sort of seed funding money. So we're going to start on the left-hand side. For the studentships, the goal of the program is really to make sure students understand what brain tumor research is, and to really get them a sense of how interesting and valuable and important their work could be within the field of brain tumor research, so that as they move forward, as they're making those choices that will affect how they move throughout their academic or clinical career, they've got a sense of what they're getting into, and hopefully we foster a sense of value and love for the field of research, and that they can really make a real and measurable difference. So from an eligibility standpoint, this is really focused on undergraduates and first-year medical only. So what we mean by medical only is MD PhDs, because they are already accepted into a PhD program, are not eligible. There are some gray areas with undergraduates in that kind of transition year and what you've done. So if you have any specific questions about your scenario where you think you might fit, but you don't fit into these two really broad categories, there'll be an email address at the end that you can contact. Brain Tumour Foundation, particularly Sue Ripers, who is the research coordinator, are really great about answering questions and being really open and honest with potential students. Next, we have the fellowships. These are from an eligibility perspective for PhDs within 3 years of graduate, so young career scientists, and MDs within 5 years of graduation. For all the PhDs out there who, much like me when I would have been in that books, are wondering why MDs get extra years, it's because of their residency. And we want to make sure that as they're moving forward, as they're making choices, that they get a sense of what research and brain tumor research is. So we want to make sure that for both PhDs who've already decided on that research track and MDs who may be in that process of deciding whether they want to be fully quote unquote just clinical, or whether they want to move into more of a clinical research perspective, have opportunities to make those choices. And part of that's because of the goal of the program, and this goal of the fellowship program is really around making sure that brain tumor projects have people that work on them. So as many of you on this call are aware, the way most research programs work is you have a principal investigator, and then they have to find salary money and project money for any project in their lab and any person in their lab. So what Brain Tumor Foundation, the strategic decision that we as a foundation have made is part of what we can do, and part of the way that we can bring value to the research program is not to kind of provide large quantities of lab backing money, but to make targeted choices on fellowships here to make sure the salary frees up funds for brain tumor money. And that's kind of one of those big picture goals. I know for many of you that may not be you may not care as much about that aspect of it, but I think it's important that as you go through, as you start to decide how you're going to structure your grant, it's important for you to understand what the goals of the program are, so that way you can target the information you're giving us to the goal of the program. When we start talking about the research program, again, this is where we have kind of, a lot of variability in who's eligible. Here we have any principal investigator at an accredited institution or pharmaceutical company. As you can imagine, when we start talking about quality of life or nursing PhD or some of these other areas that have a lot of value and to the Brain Tumor Foundation family of things that we want to do for patients and with the research community. Again, this is another one where it might be best to contact Brain Tumor Foundation directly, explain your situation, see what you have to do to confirm that you're eligible for funding for a project. And the goal here is seed money for brain tumor specific research. And I can't stress the last part of that enough. We're not looking to fund a whole lab. That's not what the money is really designed for in this particular program. It's really designed to make sure that you can explore ideas that are going to bring value and going to bring solutions and new ways to think about brain tumors and think about care and think about therapies and cures for brain tumors to your research program. It's designed to really give you a chance to explore a new avenue that potentially you wouldn't have if you didn't have the money. So when we talk about those programs, obviously it's important to talk about who reviews the grants. So in addition to those big picture, the other piece that I think is invaluable when we start talking about how do you structure your grant, how do you decide what to put in, what not to put in, it's important to understand who's reviewing your grants, who's making those decisions, because at the end of the day, it's going to come down to, how much was the grant liked, how much was it understood the value that it brings to the Brain Tumor Foundation community. So the committee that reviews grants is the research board, and it's made up of 10 members. The backgrounds are very diverse. We have clinicians, we have caregivers, we have members of the Brain Tumor Foundation staff. We have a lot of people who've done research for a long time. We have a variety of strengths and weaknesses, but we meld together as a group to look at grants, and we really make sure that we take the whole perspective of the Brain Tumor Foundation's mandate into reviewing each one of the grants and into reviewing each grant program submission. And we do that using a ranking system. It's not the CIHR ranking system. It's a very it's a system that has, for anybody who's taken their MBA training or something like that, it's very related to Six Sigma. It's designed to really break grants into groupings so that we can then talk about those grants. We all use the same scale. We all use the same criteria, and there's 7 specific criteria, but at an upper level, it really goes down to 4 things. It's the overall quality of the grant, and what that actually means on a practical level is does this make sense? Based off the information that we've been given, based off the information that we as the committee know about the Brain Tumor Foundation mandate, does this grant provide quality? I mean, if it works, and we assume that everybody who's putting in a grant is putting in a grant that they think is going to work, they think they're going to meet the expected outcomes. If that works, is it going to bring quality and push to the next step? And again, because we do have a diverse set of talents within the group, we need to know that there's some logic behind that hypothesis. It can't be hidden in a bunch of jargon. It really has to lay out, here's what we know, here's what we're going to do, here's why we think it's going to work. And so again, clear and reasonable. We're not expecting in a 2-year research grant or a 2-year postdoc or a 2-summer undergraduate research fellowship that you're going to solve brain tumors or cure brain cancer. But we're looking for clear and reasonable goals that are along those lines that could lead to the next steps, that you thought beyond just getting the money. And all that kind of feeds into the idea that the project or the fellow or the student will move brain tumor research forward. The idea is that the money is designed to foster a love and a focus on brain tumor research that isn't provided by CIHR or Cancer Canada, these other areas that have different focuses or maybe larger focuses depending on your point of view. So how does that actually work? So again, this is kind of those details that a lot of people ask us about, and the way that it actually works is each committee member is given the same group of grants. So if we get in 10, all 10 committee members review all 10 grants individually by themselves and design using the same scoring criteria, give a score across 7 different categories, which then gives a weighted final score to each one of the grants. And that will be the committee's rankings. So it's a final score. It's across those 7 categories. We then submit those. They then get kind of aggregated, and we have a ranked list of grants based off of the aggregate and average of the 10 reviewers. Now, as you can imagine, what always comes up is you'll have different people who have a different point of view, or maybe, for example, grants that are very technical. Sometimes it's up to interpretation, or grants that are not very technical are up to interpretation, and different committee members have different interpretations. What we do when we have those kind of situations across any of the grants is we'll look at it and we'll talk about why there's a disparity between the two. And then maybe we'll see if either party wants to re-rank them, and then we'll move on from there. What we try and do is make sure that we have a consensus around the grants and the ordering of the grants. Where we spend the most of our time is those at the cutoff. If we have, depending on where that cutoff is, if we have slots for 5 fellowships, we'll spend a lot of time on numbers 6 through 4. Do those 3 grants make sense? Are they in the right order? Because we understand that we are talking about somebody's salary. We want to be respectful of the time that you put in. We want to make sure that we do the best job for not only the foundation, but also for the people who've taken the time to submit a grant, to make sure that we're making decisions based off of the best information that we have based on the grant, right? So what we will do, so for example, if we have enough funding for 4 and grant 4, 5, and 6 had some widely disparate scores. So we had a couple people who thought differently of each one of those. And so you can see where you can flip the rankings very easily if one person changed their mind. We as a group will talk about it. We don't, it's not a lobbying system. It's a group conversation around, does that make sense? Is the reason that is there a logical, scientific, or lack of, or misread of what somebody put in there that caused the disparity in the scoring of the grants? We leave room for everybody to have a different opinion, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the difference of opinions are based off of their scientific background and their background as a Brain Tumor Foundation grant reviewer, not based off of a misunderstanding of information, potentially because somebody wrote something wrong or something else. So what that really comes down to, and when we're really talking about it, is what does this mean for you as the potential grantee? And there's some big picture items I want to go through and take a little time now to think about how you can kind of structure your grant to make sure that it's A, factual, because we'll see through that, and B, provides clear information that we can use to act upon. So one of the key things, and you've heard me mention a couple times, is that the committee has a variety of talents and level of scientific education. What that means for you is there's not a lot of room to hide. Within that group, and because we all share information, because we all make sure before any grant is given that we all have our say on the science of it, or the realistic sense of whether that is clinical ready or whether that is just rehashing something that was done 20 years ago. All of that is going to be known within this committee. It's a really robust committee. It's one of the best committees I've been on, frankly, as far as the width of talent and the understanding of what a good Brain Tumor Foundation grant looks like. And that leads us to the second part. Use the KISS method. Keep the explanations, keep it clean, clear, and simple. Make sure that as you're explaining it, make sure that everybody could understand it. So the way I used to do this, and the way I explain it to when I mentor young scientists, is, could your grandmother understand this? Now, with the exception of if your grandmother has her Ph.D., you're going to have to simplify the language, but be clear that you're not dumbing it down. Don't gloss over facts that are necessary to make a decision on your grant, because I can guarantee you that somebody in that room will know and will be uncomfortable with giving you money if they feel like you're lying to them or glossing over facts that are necessary to make a clear decision between you and somebody else that may have just as good a grant as you. So again, always remember that at the end of the day, this is a competition, and one of the things that we always are trying to do is make sure this is fair and balanced for everybody across the country, across every lab, across different types of grants. So for example, the last couple of years, we've had quality of life grants that are going into the same competition with a clinical fMRI grant and a very basic research grant. If there seems to be factual items missing in any of those grants, it's going to make it lower on the list. So from a how do you make sure you compete, make sure you don't dumb it down too much. Make sure you're clear. Try and stay away from the jargon, but make sure you're clear. And that goes into the next point as well. While we're trying to make sure that we're giving everybody information to understand how interesting and cool your grant is, please don't just cut and paste your submission from another panel. Because those CIHR, particularly CIHR panels, because those grants are targeted at senior scientists who are reviewing your grant in the CIHR competition, you tend to be more jargon heavy and you tend to gloss over some basic facts that would be necessary for this committee to make an accurate decision on your grant. It also just clearly denotes that you don't care whether you get the money. And if you don't care, how can we be confident that long-term you're going to be part of the innovation, part of the research that the Brain Tumor community needs to move forward and move towards therapies and cures and better palliative care and all the things that are part of the mandate of Brain Tumor Foundation. Don't make it easy for us to dismiss your grant, I guess, is the kind of bottom line there. Make it clear that this is a focus for you. Make it clear that brain tumor research is something that you're going to do beyond just getting that money and then walking away. And this is one of those things that the last point here is one of those things that we often don't talk about enough, particularly as scientists, because we get so wrapped up, and because as a scientist, your goal is always to make sure that everybody understands how much data is out there and how much data I have, and that leads to the logical conclusion that because I already have some of the data, what I'm suggesting makes sense and is going to be doable. That's not necessarily the way you're going to get this kind of seed funding, or frankly, when we talk about other small targeted foundations like Brain Tumor Foundation, that's not necessarily what we're looking for. This is not a CHR panel. It's not a Cancer Canada grant. What we're looking for is your ability to execute on the project. The fact that you have a ton of flashy figures of cells in a dish or analytics are not as valuable as one or two targeted figures that explain the method, that take that 2 paragraphs of method explanation out of the grant itself, to leave you space to have some clarity on what you're going to do, and provides us the method so that now you can make sure that we're seeing the big picture, that you understand where this project fits in your research program or in your career. You also make sure that we understand how this research can get done. That allows us to evaluate, can you execute this? Can you, as the person who's going to have the money in your hands, whether it's a studentship, fellowship, or research grant, can you actually get this done? Is it realistic for you to be able to do it? Not that it could be done by the next scientist, but that you, as the person who's suggesting that they're going to do it, can do it. And that's really about your ability to execute on the project there, not about the flashiness of the preliminary data. So what do you need to know? So this really comes down to, and some of these are not just for Brain Tumor Foundation. These are kind of tips and tricks that I use on successful grants, and some of the don'ts are honestly things that I used to do on unsuccessful grants, and things that we often see on unsuccessful brain tumor grants. So on the do side, as I mentioned, and be honest, the worst thing you can do when you're doing the expectations or the possible pitfalls is to say there's none, because you know that, and we all in the committee know that that's actually wrong. That's a lie. Anything can fail. It's whether you've thought about it enough. So again, going back to some of these factors that influence how your grant ranks, whether you've actually put any thought into it, and whether you understand how to deal with the possible pitfalls is an important one to us. Because again, going back to the idea that a lot of what we're scoring you on is your ability to execute on that project that you put in front of us. Connect the work to brain tumors. No matter how basic the research is, whether you're talking about cells in a dish, whether they are immortalized cancer lines, whether they are, primary brain tumor cells, link it back to brain tumors in a logical way based on prior work. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have an innovation that's in immortalized cells because they're not brain tumor cells. What it means is that you need to be able to connect the dots for us, whether that's and again, going back to this idea of, instead of flashy figures, having kind of a method or a connection figure would be a much more valuable use of space than to have 12 figures of cells in a dish with different colors on it. Because again, it's just not going, you don't have the physical space that you do in a CHR to kind of make that all make sense in the context of what you're being asked. So make sure that it connects to brain tumors at some level, whether it's based on genetics or whether it's based on some kind of phenotype that you're going to be looking for. or some work that somebody else has done, and you want to take your best system and do that initial test with a long-term plan to move it into a brain tumor system, whether that's in collaboration with somebody else or whether that's by building out that research program yourself, let us know. That's what we want to see. We want to understand, is this a one-off or is this part of a long-term interest in brain tumors research? And the one thing I can tell you, and it's literally one of the categories that we score on, is what's its role in curing brain tumors? So we want you to be aspirational. We want you to have a big picture. We want you to be innovative. Not every grant that wins a competition is going to be just a small step, or is going to be by a brain tumor researcher. We're looking for people who think outside the box but can explain the project and their ability to execute it. So those three things are more important than how flashy the preliminary data is. It's going to be a different case, but we want to see grants that move the needle. We want to see ways that we can help the brain tumor patients, and not just patients in 20 years, but patients of today, see the light at the end of the tunnel. Again, this foundation is built and maintained by brain tumor caregivers, the patients themselves, and people that are invested in the community. We're looking for more than baby steps, and we want you to be part of the solution to that idea of looking for more than baby steps. Be aspirational. If you have a project that you think can move it multiple needles, let's see it. We love seeing those grants. By the same token, it doesn't have to necessarily be the next new drug. Maybe it's something on quality of life. Maybe it's something on palliative care that can extend lifetimes, so that the other grants that we're looking at, that are drug treatments, can have a chance to make an impact on somebody who's alive today. Again, we're looking for grants that help us move the mandate of Brain Tumor Foundation forward, whether that is, and that doesn't necessarily just mean new drugs or new surgeries. It can be on quality of life. It can be on palliative care. It can be on things that maybe aren't quite as easily tested, but your ability to execute that project is so high that we can't look away. On the don't side, and I've hinted at a bunch of these, but I just wanted to be explicit. Don't gloss over facts. There are, I can't tell you the number of studies that look at the same drug and have slightly different takes on maybe failed clinical trials. From the committee's perspective, without there being some large innovation, there's no reason to keep hitting at that same drug trial that we know is already being funded by Cancer Canada. So don't gloss over those facts. Let us know why you think yours is different. At the same time, don't overstate minimal data points. If you have one really interesting experiment that you think shows something, don't overstate it. Again, if this is for a research grant and it is seed funding, we are more interested in your ability to execute on that project than how much data you have on that project. What we want to see is it's clear, it's logical, it has a chance to, based off of either what you've done or what's already been done in the field, to succeed. So don't try and stretch the data, and we've all done this when we're doing grant submissions. Please don't hide behind the jargon to appear an expert. What happens when you use a lot of jargon? You make your grant hard to read, and when your grant's hard to read, it doesn't score as well. That you may be up in arms because those words actually make sense to you, but if no one can understand your grant, it's not going to do well. And that's true in any panel, especially when we're talking about grants that are designed to move a mandate of a foundation forward. We don't need to be told about DPIG and 12 different kind of therapeutic factors that you're going to look at. this is the committee can see through that, and all it does is frustrate people because you've wasted a lot of your own brain power coming up with words that are big rather than explaining it simply. There's an Einstein quote that I love, which the paraphrasing is, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. And I think that's one thing that you see really good scientists do, and it's one thing that the committee really takes to heart. All of us know how to explain brain tumor science, whether we're talking about the caregivers or whether we're talking about the clinicians or whether we're talking about the researchers themselves. We can all explain it and we can all make a case. What we want to see is that you can do that as well. Don't hide behind flashy figures. Again, maybe you can tell by the things that I'm bringing up multiple times, but these are the kinds of things that grants that lose do all the time. They have flashy figures, but not a lot of substance on how they're going to get from flashy figure to clinical data or quality of life. We don't care as much about how big the past is. We care about how you're going to get it to the future. This is a very future forward looking grant committee. So don't hide behind flashy figures or publication history. Just because you have these 12 grants and these 12 publications that have the word brain tumor in them doesn't mean that the project in front of us is going to be successful just because you've had success publishing in the past. The Brain Tumor Foundation is not as concerned as publications for the sake of publication as we are moving the needle forward for brain tumor research and brain tumor patients. So keep that in mind as you're trying to decide what to do about figures and other pieces of kind of fluff to kind of back yourself up. Make sure your CV is clean and clear. Make sure that it has a good chance of making us understand your publication history, and also potentially understanding where you're at in your career with respect to what you're going to do with brain tumors and whatnot. Use that space to increase to around that fluff around justification and flash. One item that often gets poo-pooed as far as the amount of time that you as a researcher spend on it is budget. Make sure it's clear. This comes up a lot when we're talking about infrastructure, travel funds to be used out of this money, out of the grant. Make sure there's a logic behind why you're suggesting that you need this amount in travel and this amount in other kind of funding. Particularly for fellowships where the majority of the money is designed to go to salary. That other money, don't just throw away some throwaway figures and items just for the sake of it. Put a little bit of thought into why you're earmarking that money for that kind of task. Nothing is more frustrating as a grant reviewer than seeing 5,000 for travel but having no sense of why there's that much travel within a 2-year research grant. We want you to share research. We want you to collaborate with researchers and go to meetings, but it's not designed for you to stay at the Palazzo and go and make a weekend out of it. It's designed to go to a conference. I understand the conferences are expensive, but again, just give us a sense of why you need that much for travel or for something else. And with that, I'm gonna stop here. I know it's really short, but this is the information that we wanted to get across to you. And what I'd like to do, if there are any questions, is open it up for questions. As you can see on the screen, please check back on the website regularly for eligibility and program dates. The information is here. You can also just Google Brain Tumor Canada and Research Program, and that'll get you right to that page. Follow the Brain Tumor Foundation on Twitter, that's there. If you have specific questions about any of the grant programs that we talked about today, please feel free to email Susan Ripers, the research program specialist, and her email is there. And with that, I will, if there's any questions, I will take them.
So Chris, doesn't look like there are any questions. So if people do have questions that come after the fact, then please do email me through at the email address that Chris has provided, and we will make sure that your question is answered. If there's anything that we didn't cover in the presentation or that Chris didn't touch base about that you're curious to know more about, please do use that email address and we can make sure that your questions are answered. Besides the technical glitch at the beginning, that will be edited out, but this will be provided online after, so that you can refer it back or you can share it accordingly with others that might not have been able to join us today. So if there isn't any other questions, I'd like to thank Chris for taking the time to present today and wish everyone a wonderful weekend. Thanks, Chris.
Great. Thanks, everybody.